Hello, and welcome to our online information session introducing fellowships for advanced social science research on Japan. My name is Mark Silver, and I'm a program officer in the Division of Research Programs at the National Endowment for the Humanities. I'm joined here by my colleague Jacob Lusk, who's the program analyst for this and for other fellowships programs here at NEH. He's not actually visible on the screen, but he's there in the background. Do you want to say a quick hello, Jacob?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
This session is scheduled to last for 1 hour, and the presentation I'm going to make is going to last 20 to 25 minutes. I'll spend the remaining time answering any questions that you might like to ask. We plan to post a recording of this session on the NEH website. We'll do that within a week of today. I have on the next slide, I want to show the agenda for this session. These are the points I'm going to cover. We'll talk about the goals of the program and its scope, who's eligible, the details of the calendar and the award amounts, the review criteria, the required application materials, and how to submit an application. You should feel free to type in your questions throughout the presentation using the chat function, and Jacob will either answer using the chat function or hold the question for me to answer once I've finished with the presentation. I want to be sure to mention at the outset that this program is a joint activity of the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Japan-US Friendship Commission, or JUSFC for short. The JUSFC is the primary funder of the program. We at the NEH run the review process and we administer the awards. The program's goals include promoting Japan studies in the United States, encouraging US-Japan scholarly exchange, and supporting the next generation of Japan scholars in the United States. And in light of that last goal, we especially encourage applications from junior scholars to this program. The program's intended to support research on modern Japanese society and political economy, Japan's international relations, and US-Japan relations. Appropriate disciplines include anthropology, economics, geography, history, international relations, linguistics, political science, psychology, and sociology. The program's designed for individual researchers with advanced Japanese language skills whose work requires Japanese sources, field work, interviews, or other kinds of contact using the Japanese language. The awards may be held in Japan or in the US or both, and you may also do work in other countries apart from Japan and the US as part of your project for comparative purposes. There are certain types of projects that we do not support in this program. You should be aware that we don't support projects focused primarily on pre-modern Japan, that is, Japan before 1868. We're not able to support projects focused primarily on the interpretation of literary or artistic works, or projects that lie outside the social sciences. Nor does the program support projects advocating a particular program of social action or particular public policies or legislation. In the notice of funding opportunity, there's a complete list of the prohibitions in section D6, and that document, the notice of funding opportunity, is posted on the same web page where you found the link to this online information session. Next, the eligibility requirements. To be eligible to apply to this program, you must either be a US citizen or you must have been living in the US for the 3 years preceding the application deadline, which for this round is April 28th, 2021. If you're currently enrolled in a degree program, you're not eligible to apply unless you've met all the requirements for the degree at the time of the application deadline. In other words, you're merely awaiting the formal award of your degree at that point. These awards cannot be used for dissertation research. No institutional affiliation is required to apply, so independent scholars are entirely welcome. No advanced degree is required, although most applicants do have a PhD. And as I mentioned before, and as we have on this slide here again in bold, junior scholars are especially encouraged to apply, although applicants at all ranks are welcome. Key program details. So these are the details of the calendar and the award amounts. The program supports 6 to 12 months of continuous full-time work. So if you have a teaching position, you'll probably need to arrange for a leave in order to accept an award, because we do require full-time continuous work for the duration of your award period. The stipend is $5,000 per month, and the maximum award is $60,000. So that would be for 12 months of full-time work. The application deadline is April 28th, and you'll be notified of the decision on your application in the early part of December. The earliest possible start date, if you win an award in this round, would be January 1st, 2022, and the latest possible start date would be September 1st, 2023. So you can see we offer you quite a generous window there in which to start your 6 to 12 month clock ticking. There's a tip on this slide. Take care to state your requested start and end dates correctly. That may seem obvious, but if you specify dates that make for an award period of shorter than 6 months or of longer than 12 months, then you're running the risk of disqualification on a technicality, and we do unfortunately see that happen from time to time. You can, by the way, change your start and end date later at the time that we make you an offer if you need to do that. The one catch is you cannot increase the amount of time of your award period at that point. So if you requested an 8-month award period, you would have to stick with 8 months or possibly reduce to 7 months or 6 months if you needed to do that. But you wouldn't be able to increase the length of your award beyond the 8 months that you originally requested. But again, we do allow you to adjust your start and end dates when you accept an offer from us. Supported activities. These awards are meant to support what we think of as the typical research activities of scholars in the social sciences. So you can use the funds for field work, interviews, archival research, writing and revision, or the development of digital materials, or some combination of all of these things. You could use the funds for travel, but there's no requirement that you do so. The products that you create may be print products, or they may be digital products. You can write a book or articles, or produce a translation or a scholarly edition, or create other interpretive tools for social scientists. This next slide has 3 examples of recent books written with the support of our fellowships. Saori Katada's book, Japan's New Regional Reality, appears on the left. That was published by Columbia University Press in July of last year in 2020. In the middle, Mary Alice Haddad's book, Effective Advocacy, Lessons from East Asian Environmentalists. That one will be published this month with the MIT Press. And then on the right, Dennis Frost's book, More Than Medals, subtitled A History of the Paralympics and Disability Sports in Post-War Japan. That book was published by Cornell University Press just this past January. Let's take a look now at the review criteria for this program. And I realize this is a rather text-heavy slide, but it's an important one. These review criteria are published on our website in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. When you're writing your application, you want to keep these review criteria very much in mind. And you want to try to craft your narrative statement in your application to address these criteria. You also want to coach the people writing letters of reference for you to address these criteria as well in their letters. These are the very same criteria that we ask our evaluators to use as they're sizing up your application. So you need to have them at your left elbow as you're working, just as our evaluators will have them at their elbow when they're reading and evaluating your application. The first criterion is the intellectual significance of the proposed project, including its value to social science scholars, general audiences, or both. As you're writing your narrative statement, you want to be sure to situate your work in existing scholarship. You want to explain the payoff of what you're doing in your project. You don't want to assume that the evaluators will understand the intellectual significance of your project. That's probably the biggest mistake that I see applicants making, is failing to really lay out the payoff of the project and its significance in clear fashion for the evaluators. And even if they do see the significance of the project themselves, they want you to do that work of spelling it out for them so that they know that you know the significance of the project. So that's very important. The second criterion is the degree to which the proposed project furthers scholarly knowledge or public understanding of contemporary Japanese society or political economy, Japan's contemporary international relations, and/or US-Japan relations. You want to be sure that you're connecting the dots in your application narrative, particularly if you're an historian. Explain how your project helps us understand contemporary Japan, even though you may be looking at an episode at some remove in the past, episode or episodes. The third criterion is the quality or promise of quality of the applicant's work as an interpreter of the social sciences. You want to devote some space in your application to talking about your previous work. You want to ask your letter writers, again, to do that as well in the materials that they submit. I also want to underline in criterion number 3 the phrase promise of quality. This is intended to level the playing field between junior scholars and scholars at later career stages. Since we're encouraging applications from junior scholars, we want to be sure that you're getting a fair shake if you are a junior scholar. So we direct the evaluators to take into account promise of quality. That means that senior scholars who have 5 books on their CV are not automatically getting an edge simply because of that track record and the career stage that they're in at the time that they apply. The fourth criterion is the quality of the conception, definition, organization, and description of the project, and the applicant's clarity of expression. You need to clearly explain your sources and your methods in your narrative statement, and I'll underline that word, clarity. Clarity of expression is explicitly mentioned in our evaluation criteria, and this is extremely important. You need to write for a broad audience that includes people outside of your own field or subfield. The fifth criterion is the feasibility and appropriateness of the proposed plan of work, including, when relevant, the soundness of the dissemination and access plans. So you need to provide us with a detailed plan of work explaining, in other words, how you're going to use the time afforded by a grant. And that plan of work should be realistic. We allow you up to a full page to describe your plan of work. Explain what you're going to accomplish with the grant, what your plans for publication are as well. That's what we mean by the dissemination and access plans. If you have in mind a project that will result in a book to be published with a university press, you should think about mentioning potential presses that will be a good fit for your project as part of your discrimination, as part of your description, rather, of your dissemination plan. And then the last criterion is the likelihood that the applicant will complete the project, not necessarily during the period of performance, which is what we call the grant period. So you don't have to finish during the grant period with the whole project. You're perfectly welcome to define a portion of a larger project that you're going to be working on during the grant period. But in that case, you should explain in your application what your timeline for ultimately completing the entire project is, and how you're going to find the time and the resources to do that. All right, the next slide lists the application materials that we ask you to submit. We ask for a 3-page narrative statement, and that should follow the format that's explained in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. You also need to supply us with a 1-page plan of work, which I referred to just a moment ago, a 1,000-character abstract, and that's 1,000 characters, not 1,000 words, so it's really quite short. But that abstract is actually one of the last things that you will submit to us as you're going through the application process. And you don't want to be caught by surprise by this request to submit a 1,000-character abstract. So compose that in advance and make it intriguing. It will appear on the cover sheet of your application when it goes to the reviewers. We also ask for a 1-page bibliography. You should make sure that your bibliography is up to date. Make sure it's selective, that it represents your knowledge of the field and signals the approach that you're taking in your project. Our evaluators will look at your bibliography and evaluate it along with your other materials. We also ask for a 2-page resume or CV and any necessary appendices. These are explained in the Notice of Funding Opportunity in detail, but basically if you have visual materials, we allow a 1-page sample of those, or if you're proposing a translation or a database project, we ask to have a translation sample or a sample screenshot from your database project. Then the last item here is letters of reference. We ask for 2 of those. They're due after the application deadline. Your references have until May 26th to submit their letters. I do want to emphasize while we're on this slide, these page limits. Every item is limited as to length, and those length limits are important. You want to make sure, double check before your application goes through to us in the submission process, double check that you haven't violated any of those page limits, because we do disqualify applications that go over those page limits for any component part of the application. Or if you fail to follow the prescribed format that we've laid out in the notice of funding opportunity, again, you're leaving yourself open to disqualification. So be sure to take all those limits and format requirements seriously and observe them in your preparation of your materials. No budget is required, as the slide says, and that's because the dollar amount of the award is based on the number of months of support that you request. So the budgetary consideration here is very simple, the way we calculate this. If you're asking for 6 months of support, it'll be a $30,000 award if you're successful, because the stipend is $5,000 per month, as I mentioned earlier. We don't pare down requests. So if you ask for 10 months, we're not going to come back to you and say, you've won an award, but we're only going to give you 6 months. We don't adjust award periods in that way. So we're just making an up or down decision on the award period that you've proposed in your materials. I should also add here that we don't give preference to less expensive projects. So as you're determining your award period, what you really need to do is think about what you and your project need. So if you need 12 months and you can justify the 12-month request in your work plan, you should ask for 12 months. You won't be putting yourself at any kind of disadvantage by requesting a 12-month period as opposed to, say, an 11-month period or a 10-month period. Next slide. Resources for applicants. As you're preparing your application, you should be aware of a number of different resources that we provide for applicants on the web page for the program. First, that notice of funding opportunity, which I've mentioned several times already. It's on the same page where you found the link to join this session. And it's about a 20-page long PDF. So if you're applying to a federal grant program for the first time, you might find that it's a rather daunting document, but it's absolutely crucial for you to read it carefully and follow the instructions that we include in that document. We have 3 samples also of successful application narratives posted on the program webpage, so you can study those. You should bear in mind, though, that the application format has changed slightly since those sample applications were posted. When those samples were submitted to us as applications, we asked for only 3 pages, and that included the work plan. We've since changed that so that you have 3 pages for your narrative statement and then a separate additional 4th page to describe your work plan. There's also a list of previously funded projects on the program webpage, so you might find that interesting to look at as well to give you a sense of what we've funded in the past. You should use that list with some caution, though, because we do change from time to time over the years the scope of the program and the types of projects that are allowable. So you should keep that in mind as you're studying that list. FAQs. We have an FAQ document with answers to frequently asked questions. You should also review that document. And then and there's the URL for the program webpage on the slide there. And then I wanted to highlight the last item on this slide, which is advice from NEH staff. You should feel free to get in touch with us if you have questions. It's part of our job to make sure that you understand our programs and also to help you put your best foot forward in the application process. So you can contact us at that email address, fellowships@neh.gov, or give us a call, 202-606-8200. If you do give us a call, please leave your email address, because often it's easier for us to get back in touch with you by sending you an email rather than returning the phone call, although we are capable of that as well. Next, some of the details about how you will actually submit your application to us. You must submit your application through a separate website, separate from NEH's website, that is, at grants.gov. This is the general portal for virtually all federal grant applications. If you know you're interested in submitting an application, you should go ahead and establish an account for yourself now at grants.gov. Go ahead and register to create an account, because that can take a little bit of time. And an important tip here, point number 2 on this slide, you must create an individual applicant profile in your account at grants.gov. That's because these grants are grants made to individuals, and if you neglect to create an individual applicant profile for yourself, you will not be able to submit an application to this program. What you're going to see is that the red button that says apply, that you can see in the illustration on this slide, that apply button will be grayed out and you will not be able to use it. So that will be your indication that you need to go back and create an individual applicant profile for yourself. This is probably the #1 technical problem that our applicants have submitting materials to us through grants.gov. The Notice of Funding Opportunity contains instructions for creating that individual applicant profile, and again, also all the other instructions that you need to submit an application. Point 3, submit several days early. This grants.gov website can be somewhat cumbersome to use, especially if you're doing it for the first time. And moreover, if you fail to follow our instructions to the letter and there's some kind of format error in your application, it may be rejected the first time you try to submit it. So you need to allow some extra time to navigate grants.gov and then to correct any technical problems that might come up when you're trying to submit the application. So I recommend that you submit at least 3 days in advance of the actual deadline, and then check to make sure that you've gotten a confirmation email assigning you a tracking number on your application, because that's a sign that things are going smoothly with your application submission. And if you don't get that email with the tracking number, you need to follow up with us or go back and look at grants.gov and make sure that there's not a problem with your application and your submission of it. There is a helpline maintained by grants.gov. It's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week helpline. The number is 1-800-518-4726. And if you do have technical problems with grants.gov, you should call that helpline rather than getting in touch with us here at NEH, because we have limited ability to solve technical problems on the grants.gov side. They also have an email address, support@grants.gov. All right, so that's it on the mechanics of submission. Let me say a word about the steps of the application review process. Your application will be read in July by a panel of 4 external evaluators, all 4 of whom will be social scientists whose research focuses on Japan. The NEH staff then makes funding recommendations based on those evaluations. Those staff recommendations are in turn reviewed by the National Council on the Humanities. They will be meeting in November to review recommendations in this particular competition. And the chairman of the endowment will make the final decisions on the awards shortly after that. You will get the news about our decision in mid-December. All right, so that's the final slide I have in this presentation. And I'm ready to see whether we have any questions that have come in, and I'll ask Jacob to help me field those by letting me know what's come in. Here's our contact information again, though. If we're not able to get to your question today, please ask your question by sending us an email to that address, or again, there's the phone number on that slide as well. All right, so Jacob, can you let me know what might have come in the way of questions?
Sure thing. I'd just like to encourage everyone to continue writing in with your questions if you'd like. The first question I have, Mark, relates to program statistics. How many awards do we make in this program, and how many applications do we often receive?
Yeah, good question. We generally make 2 or 3 awards each year in this program, and the success ratio is around 10%. So we generally get around 30 applications or so each year. And that's in line with other NEH fellowships programs, all of which tend to be quite competitive. This one is smaller than most of our other programs in terms of the size of the application pool and the number of awards that we're able to make.
We have another question about, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. We have another question about the US residency requirement for non-citizen applicants. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So the key point about this residency requirement is that you must have resided in the US for the 3 years preceding the application deadline. It's not good enough just to have 3 years of residency accumulated at some point prior to the application deadline. So it must be those 3 years prior to the application deadline. And what we expect is that you've maintained a residence in the US. So it is permissible to take short trips outside of the US during that 3-year period, even if you're not a US citizen. But you need to maintain the residence here in the United States, and should not have been away on an extended absence from the country during that time.
Great. And just to reiterate for everyone that all US citizens are eligible to apply regardless of where you live in the world.
Yes, that's true.
Yes. We have another question about how awards are paid out. You know, who's the recipient of the award, the person or the institution, and what can they use the award money for?
Yeah, good questions. So these awards are made to individuals, not to institutions. What we do is we give you a choice. At the time that we make an offer to you, you would complete some paperwork indicating where you'd like to have the money deposited. And you can choose either to have the money deposited into your own personal bank account, or if you would prefer, you can have the money deposited in an institutional account, even though the award is not made to the institution. A lot of people who have an institutional affiliation find that the easier course, simply because you can then have deductions made for health insurance premiums or retirement accounts and so forth. And the money would then function as salary replacement, essentially. The one caveat here with having the money put in an institutional account is that the institution may not take a cut of the award for indirect cost recovery. Sometimes grants officers at colleges and universities are in some confusion about this, but this award is made to individuals, not to institutions, and therefore there's no indirect cost recovery allowed to cover overhead costs at the institution. The other part of that question was, what can you use the money for? You can use it to support yourself while you're working on the project, so it can cover living expenses. You could hire a research assistant if you'd like to do that. You can use it for course buyouts. You can use it, as I said, essentially for salary replacement during the time that you're working on the award. You can use the money for travel, though there's no requirement that you travel. There are probably more things that you can use it for than there are things that you cannot use it for. We have very few restrictions as long as the money is being used in support of your project. Jacob, you're muted if you're trying to ask the next question.
No, I would, but we have one question here about does the application need to demonstrate meeting any interests or benefits to the United States?
No, what we're looking for is what's listed in those evaluation criteria there. So that's not an area that I would really focus my energy on if I were an applicant. I mean, in most cases, there will be an implicit understanding that the scholarship that you're doing and the project that you're doing, even if it's primarily focused on Japan, is benefiting the United States in the sense that scholarship on Japan and knowledge of Japan are being promoted here in the United States, which is one of those program goals that I laid out at the beginning of the presentation. So focus on those evaluation criteria and focus your project and your description of the project in the way that is faithful to your own sense of what you want to do. I think that's probably the most important bit of advice I can give in terms of framing the project. Because if you're trying to bend your project to sort of meet some set of artificial expectations, it will end up showing through in most cases in your project description, and probably will mean that your description is less effective and less convincing.
I don't have any other questions right now that are outside the scope of what we've already discussed. I do have a few that I'm going to respond to individually. Oh, okay, well, we just got one question then that asks about the need for a budget in the application. Do you want to talk about that, Mark?
Sure. We do not ask you to submit a budget with your application materials, and that's because the award amount is based on the number of months of support that you're requesting. So if you're requesting 6 months of support and you're committing 6 months of full-time work on the project, then we would give you $30,000, and that's a very simple calculation based on $5,000 per month that you're requesting. So if you tell us in your application, I'm going to use part of this money for an airplane ticket to Osaka on this date, and I'm going to use part of the money for hotel expenses and so forth, you're really just wasting space in your application. That information is not pertinent to the decision.
Great, thank you, Mark. Sorry, just looking over a few new questions that have come in. Okay, does does the committee, and I think maybe the person means anyone, both the panel and the NEH staff, do we take into consideration whether a proposal might be very similar to previous successful proposals? I think what they're asking is, would we disqualify something that was somewhat similar in topic to a project that had already been funded in this program in the past?
Okay, so I think the short answer is no. Just because your topic happens to be similar to a topic of a previously funded project, we would not discount its importance or disqualify it because of that overlap. However, you do need to be making a strong case for the intellectual significance of your project, including situating it within existing scholarship. So if you're simply duplicating something that someone else has already done and your study is not going beyond that other work in some important way, then the project would not do well on that first evaluation criterion where we're evaluating intellectual significance of the project. So intellectual significance is linked in some way to novelty, to the idea that you're making a fresh contribution. So in that way, you could be certainly hurting yourself if you're simply duplicating someone else's scholarly work. But as far as the topic goes, we would not say, oh, 2 years ago we funded something that had to do with Fukushima, so we're not going to do another project this year on Fukushima. We're not ruling out certain projects based in that way. We're not trying to guarantee some kind of broad coverage of topics in the array of projects that we fund.
Thanks, Mark. We don't have any more questions unless folks have a few more that they want to write in with.
Okay. Well, I will say thank you then to those of you watching, and thank you for your interest in the program. Remember, if you have additional questions for us, we're here and we're happy to try and answer those. And I wish you all luck in the competition, those of you who are planning to submit applications. Thanks again for watching.